Hello and welcome to Health and Fitness Redefined. I'm your host, Anthony Amen. Join me today as we take a dive into the world of health and fitness, where we learn how to overcome adversity, to break back first vision, and see health and fitness in a whole new light. Welcome, guys. We've done many episodes at this point. I think we're almost at 150, which is kind of amazing. And I just want to give a quick shout out to all of you listeners. Thank you guys so much for being supportive of the show. It's what motivates me to get up in the morning, get these out for you, and keep going, basically. And I plan on going for the near future. So thank you so much for your support, guys. Like always, please subscribe and share. Your views and your following is how we rank higher. And the more people we can get on this show, the more motivating it is to do it. So let's keep the ball rolling with that. And thank you so much to everybody. Today's show, we're going to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, about medicine. I mean, we've done this before. We've talked to some MDs. We've talked to some DOs. Excuse me. A lot of you do know that my whole family is a bunch of DOs. So rest in peace to my grandma. Love you so much. She just recently passed away. So she was the one that really helped get DOs on the map. So thank you so much to her. I do love you. But without further ado, let's welcome to the show Dr. Josh Levitt. I hope I said that right. Dr. Josh is a naturopathic doctor here with us today, and we're going to talk about what the heck is a naturopathic doctor and what's the difference between you DOs and MDs. So welcome to the show.
Yeah, right on. Thank you for having me. Your family history, and I don't mean in the medical sense of things, but the family history, the career story is really it's a remarkable one. And osteopathic
I got choked up saying that. I don't know if you could tell.
I did. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry. I mean, my condolences to the loss of your grandmother. She sounds like a really special sort of lamp lighter kind of person who led the way. A real trailblazer. It's awesome.
Yeah, she just passed a couple months ago. So really special, driven woman who, and I just got to say, and I know I'm not one to talk about my family life often, but I was blown away how many people came out and showed up at the wake, showed up at the funeral. It was, you don't see it with someone who was her age of 89 years old. Usually it's just the kind of the family around, but she ran a Methodist church. She ran NICOM for years. She started NICOM. She ran her own practice. And then my family and my grandpa were digging through her stuff. And she published books no one knew about.
Amazing.
Books for her Methodist church. And everyone's like, when did she write this? On top of that, she fostered 20 kids and then adopted 2 more of her own and had 5 of her own herself. So who has time for that? I have no idea, but what a wonderful just human being. And I'm not just saying that because she's my grandma. There's someone to look up to. So really just wanted to get that out there. But anyway, let's talk about yourself a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Right. I don't have the credentials that she had. That's for sure. But I can tell you this sort of the brief sort of origin story, if you will. I grew up in Southern California. I was a surfer and a skater. I got a lot of broken bones and sprained ankles and all sorts of stuff. So orthopedic medicine was very close to my heart and my soul back then. I always wanted to be a doctor. I went to UCLA as an undergrad and I studied neurophysiology there. And it was there that I started to learn from a lot of doctors. My dad was training medical residents at UCLA at the time, that medicine was really changing for the worse. A lot of the docs that I knew and that he introduced me to were telling me, a career in medicine is not what it used to be, with all the, big insurance, big pharma, all the kind of things that I think a lot of people these understand as some of the pitfalls of mainstream medicine. These guys were seeing it early on. This is more than 25 years ago. So instead of sort of going the conventional track, I took off for a year and I hitchhiked around the world. I slept on beaches, stayed in youth hostels, that sort of thing. And during that trip on an airplane ride into Switzerland, I had developed a blister on the back of my foot. I got cellulitis, which is a very bad, limb threatening infection. It was on my leg. And I found my way into a pharmacy in Switzerland where I was able to get a prescription for antibiotics, which saved my leg, at least, maybe even my life. But it was in that pharmacy that I realized that there's this whole world of medicine which was herbal medicine, nutritional medicine, all these things that were like kind of like part of normal conventional medicine over there in Europe, but not here in the United States. And so that just ignited a passion in me about, how plants could be used, homeopathic medicines, all the kind of thing that we think of as natural or alternative medicine was this whole universe that was alive and well in Europe and was just I don't know, not really given a second thought by all of the doctors, conventional doctors that I knew. Anyway, here we are 25 years later. I have a clinical practice here in Connecticut. I am a founder and the medical director for a nutritional supplement company where I formulate products like that I own. And it's been a lifetime of learning and a road of discovery. I really see myself kind of on a bridge, if you will, between mainstream conventional medicine and alternative medicine, which when I first started was a very big gap in between those two. And I feel like and not just me, but a lot of people are trying to build that bridge so that people can understand and have access to just good medicine in general, whether it's conventional or whether it's alternative. So anyway, that's me.
Yeah, and I think that bridge is important. And I just want to say the reason I gave that comparison about my grandmother is what she fought for many years to make DOs equivalent to MDs. Originally, when she and my grandfather were in DO school in Chicago, they were considered lower down than MDs. They weren't allowed to do things MDs were. They weren't allowed to be in the same hospital sometimes as MDs were. And they had to prove that they knew as much, if not more, than MDs knew. And then eventually, you guys don't even realize when you go to a physician, you don't know if you're seeing an MD or DO. You have no idea. Unless you're looking at the last two letters, you say MD, DO. They're so intertwined now and so just a norm in the community that you're not going to really understand the difference between both of them. So that's from my grandparents and other people that helped them out. So that's the first step. And the second step, coming into what we've talked about numerous times on this show, is, as everyone knows, my personal belief is fitness is medicine. There's an alternative form of medicine that is shunned by the medical community. It's really not pushed. It's not prescribed. And PT, so physical therapy, until recently, has only recently been starting to be prescribed more and more and more, as opposed to just medication. So we're slowly starting to take that alternative route. And I think that has a lot to do with people kind of waking up to the fact that all medicine isn't made equal. And just because someone's going to write you a script and say, take this, go home, have a good day, there's a little more to it. And I think it really started with the big narcotic issue we had in the late 90s, early 2000s. How often were narcotics prescribed out where people just became addicted and doctors kept pushing because they made a pretty penny off of it, or because it's the only thing they knew and they didn't know how addicting it was. People trusted them, became addicted, and then lost that trust. So I think a lot has to do from that branch off of that. I just wanted to get your opinion on that.
Yeah, well, I think we totally agree. I often say movement is medicine. You said fitness is medicine. So we're very much on the same page there. And one interesting thing that I think comes up to piggyback on what you just said is that the term RX, right? Like the symbol RX, which you see on prescription pads, you see it at pharmacies on the bottle, the little orange bottle with the white cap that you pick up there. The original meaning of that symbol was recipe. It's for the Latin word for recipe. So like these days, prescriptions, of which physicians write billions and billions of, globally, are the currency of the medical interaction, right? Like patients don't feel like they got anything out of a visit if they don't walk away with a prescription. And a prescription now just means basically a little piece of paper, or these days a digital version of, a prescription sent over to your local pharmacy, and you go pick up your pills and you're on your way. Didn't used to be that way, and it doesn't need to be that way because there's so much medicine that doesn't require a prescription, at least in the conventional medical sense. And like I said, RX means recipe at its core. Doctors used to write recipes for herbal poultices or salves or teas or movement or exercise or companionship or sleep or I mean, the list of that which is medicine is extremely long and goes far beyond, little pills in orange bottles with white caps that you pick up at Walgreens, right? I mean, and so that's, yeah, I think DOs understand that, like at their core, those core principles. Naturopathic doctors like me certainly understand that. Chinese medicine doctors understand that. Ayurvedic doctors, physical therapists, trainers. Yeah, medicine is much more than pills from a pharmacy, which doesn't mean that pills from a pharmacy are necessarily bad all the time either. They can be useful, like they were in my case for that cellulitis, or like they have been, I'm sure, in your life or in many other people's lives. But we go to them so quickly, as if there's no other options, and that's just not true.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. It has to be a blend. It really needs to have an understanding in our society that you need both, right? You need Eastern and you need Western, and a balance of both. Yeah, there's things that can only be fixed by surgery. There's things that can only be fixed by certain medications. 100% on board with that, without a doubt in my mind. If there's things that happen in my life that I need to go to a doctor, need to go to hospital, I'm going. I'm not going to sit at home and say, I'm going to take these like herbal things and all of a sudden be cured of skin cancer. No, I'm going to go get the blemish removed from a dermatologist so I don't die and get melanoma. So there's little things like that I'm a firm believer in doing. But I want to just take it back to most people's issues. A good example of this is lower back pain. Lower back pain is probably the most, I guess, what's the most symptom people have out of everything. Everyone complains about having lower back pain. Lower back pain, the most common cause is what we call in our industry lower cross syndrome. It means your erector spina is really super tight, your core is really weak, it's from sitting too much, and easy fixes of that are just creating movement patterns, working your core, getting you up and moving, and then that's going to go away. Sciatica is a direct reference from lower back pain. I mean, you could have piriformis syndrome, which means your piriformis is just super locked out. It's just tight as shit. So a course of stretching and exercising can relieve piriformis syndrome, which is causing your sciatic pain. And that can be done without going to the doctor, getting cortisol steroids, getting Advil or 500 mgs of ibuprofen, whatever it is. There's avenues that can help treat the underlying condition instead of putting a Band-Aid on it, which is what your medicine's going to do. So like your painkillers and everything like that.
Yeah, and sometimes those Band-Aids are pretty toxic, right? And like the evolution of treatment, even within Western medicine, of low back pain has been fascinating to watch, and it's it's a little nauseating if you think about it. Like when I first started in my medical training, the idea was that a person with an acute low back pain episode should do bed rest. Right. That was conventional medical advice, just bed rest. Turns out that's a terrible idea because, like we both agree, movement is medicine, right? Sometimes you can't move that much because you're in a lot of pain, but you move to the extent that you can. And then you address these structural or biomechanical issues that you mentioned, like a lower cross, like a strength to flexibility ratio imbalance. And then there's a lot of other things in there as well. Some amount of inflammation as a result of whatever tissue damage may have occurred, some amount of muscle tension or these strength versus flexibility balances, some amount of fibrosis, especially if which is like a scar tissue accumulation in the muscles, soft tissues, and the fascia. That can be drivers of pain. And here's the thing, right, is that when people have pain, they wind up in a conventional medical office, and they usually, if the pain is significant enough, get an MRI or an X-ray, right? And when you see what we see on MRIs and X-rays, things like narrowing of the space between adjacent vertebrae, or things like a disc that's actually bulging right on one side or the other, what winds up happening in the minds of many clinicians is just like, oh, the person has pain and they have a disc bulging, so the disc bulging must be the cause of the pain, right? Well, it turns out that's wrong. It's not true. And very many people have bulging discs or disc space narrowing who have no pain at all. In fact, many people, the classic person who has low back pain, right? It comes and it goes. It's worse on days. It's worse after long sitting. It's better when I go for a walk. But if they get diagnosed with a disc herniation, they'll often believe, oh, I must have to have surgery. I'm going to have a steroid injection, whatever the case may be, these conventional, rather invasive interventions. But it turns out that there's large segments of the population who have completely asymptomatic disc herniation. So just because you see a disc herniation does not mean that that's why you have the pain. It's often caused by something else that you can't see on the MRI. And yet it leads to these aggressive interventions, which, and this isn't a naturopathic statistic, this is sort of a general, even in general surgery journals, massive amounts of unnecessary or inappropriate surgeries. Now, that's a huge problem in this country. The knee, the hip, the low back, the neck are frequently operated on when they don't need to be. And that's scary.
In my industry, we get the people who had spinal surgery that went wrong. So I know that's a little like bias because obviously someone had a good spinal surgery isn't going to come see me.
Sure,
But
of course.
I get the worst of the worst. Oh my God, no one can help me. This lapidectomy went wrong and help. Give me my life back. Like that's what I see time and time again. I know I get the bias from it, but just gives an example where it scares the shit out of me. I'm like, I'm never getting spinal surgery. Oh my God. I don't want to be like them.
And you know, the fact that you're right, and it's good to acknowledge that there's bias, right? You're not seeing the ones who have the good outcomes. That's fine. But the fact that there's a condition that's called failed low back surgery syndrome or failed lumbar surgery syndrome, like that's a thing. The fact that that exists is frightening. Of course, not all surgeries have great outcomes, and some surgeries have fantastic outcomes. So the fact that like unnecessary or inappropriate surgeries occur or exist doesn't mean that appropriate surgeries don't exist. There's some surgeries that are great and they have great outcomes. It all comes down to selecting the appropriate candidate. But here's I think the problem is that the ego or the narcissism inside Western medicine is that we have these amazing tools, right? Robots that do surgery and advanced surgical techniques, et cetera. And that we just think that those tools are appropriate for everybody. And we forget that there's like, I like to think of it as like a ladder or a hierarchy of therapeutics: movement, dietary changes, herbal supplementation, you know, gentle stuff that a lot of times does the trick without resorting to those high rung, big gun therapies that carry with them significant risk. I mean, you know, that shouldn't be, to me, that doesn't sound very alternative. Does it to you?
I know we've used this example on the show before, and I'm blanking again what the terminology is, but the basically what it means is you're going to go, if you have a plumbing issue in your house and you say the water's not working, you call an electrician. The electrician is going to look everything in their tool bag to figure it out, even though that's not what the tool that's needed to be done to fix your plumbing issue, because they're an electrician. So for them, it's going to be electric issue. You hire a plumber, it's going to be a plumber issue. You hire a guy at the sheetrock, it's a sheetrock issue. So that's kind of the same thing with our bodies is if you go to somebody, you go to orthopedic surgeon, to them it's an orthopedic surgeon issue. You're coming to me. Like this is all I know. So this is what I'm going to focus on. If you're going to go to a GI doctor, that's all I know. That's all I'm going to focus on. So it's really just having an understanding of the multiple different avenues. So I want to just ask you to kind of move forward is why do you think naturopathic doctors have a bad rap to them? Where do you think that comes from? And do you see a change coming?
That is a really good question. There and it's true. Naturopathic doctors do have a bad rap, and it's for a couple of reasons. And I think they're two very distinctly different reasons. Let's start with the obvious one. We're not perfect. My field isn't perfect. All the people in my field. So some people do some pretty outrageous stuff that might be inappropriate too, right? So when the experience of a person, right, whether especially if it's a Western doctor, is having had an experience maybe with a patient or someone that showed up in the emergency room or whatever because of something irresponsible that a naturopathic doctor did, then of course going to have a bad rap, right? They're going to look at that and say, oh my gosh, you know, that person did something irresponsible to this patient. Now I'm left to clean up the mess. That's one reason for the bad rap. And yes, there are practices, not just in naturopathic medicine, but I think every field has people that are out there doing things that are not awesome. And if another person, has to clean up that mess or is somehow wrapped up in such a mess, that's a good reason to have a bad rap. And that does happen. I have to acknowledge that. That's true. We can talk all about the specifics later. The other reason is a different reason entirely. And it's really about ignorance, right? It's mostly about ignorance on the part of a person who doesn't think naturopathic medicine is good. Now, and we get this all the time, right? I've been practicing medicine for a long time. There's lots of conventional doctors that just think I'm a quack or a snake oil salesman. And that's generally speaking, not because I did something terrible or irresponsible or dangerous. It's mostly just because they have no idea who I am. They have no idea what I do. They have no training in it. And they, because of maybe their media bias or because of what they learned in their training or whatever else they've seen, have a bias against me that's rooted in ignorance about what it is that I actually do. And so, yeah, those are the two different reasons: genuine irresponsibility, and then the other would be ignorance.
I'm gonna add to it, and I'm just gonna use it as an example for my industry because I think we're one and the same when it comes to where we're at. So for personal training, and the same thing for you guys, there's bad people in our industry. A couple of the things that get referenced all the time, especially for us, is that there's no law or license that we have to have. Yes, there's certifications, but 90% of them are bullshit. I'll be very honest. They're pay money and here's your certification. And there are some good ones, but you have to know where to find them. We've talked about that before on the show. The second part is because there's no certification, and I know even the people with the license, they're still bad doctors. They look like physical therapists look at us and look down on us. They're like, I have a master's degree in this. And because I have this degree, I'm better than you. And you don't know what you're talking about. No matter how smart and how much knowledge you have on a situation, they think it as, we're the respected ones. We have ABC. We have all these credentials. You don't. And we've seen trainers do horrific things. And it's true. I've seen trainers do horrific things, but I've seen doctors do horrific things. I've seen nurses do horrific things. I've seen physical therapists do horrific things. But just because you have a degree in something doesn't mean that you have a know-all. Yes, I do believe we need to be licensed. The reason I believe that is because we need to be held accountable. The bad trainers need to be held accountable. I want somebody to say, you sent someone to the ER, I'm taking your license away. You can no longer practice. The same threats a doctor has over them. That would help. And I think this is the same for naturopathic doctors. It's that same kind of feel. There's no licensure that someone could say, hey, I'm going to come take this away from you and be able to sue you like I can for malpractice through a DO or an MD, and then you can no longer do what you do anymore. So
I'll give you a little, there's a little clarification. I totally agree with you. We're on the same page. I think there was a time, there's still some people, credentials equal credibility, right? Which is not necessarily the case, because
not true.
There's bad actors everywhere. And then there's plenty of good actors that are uncredentialed and do perfectly good, safe, effective work. In terms of naturopathic medicine, we're at kind of a funny middle ground, actually. So like, the way naturopathic medicine is regulated is by public health departments in different states, right? So the differences in the way the license is regarded varies from state to state. So at this point, my stats are probably about right. About half of the states in the United States, including the state that I'm in, Connecticut, do have legislation on the books that regulates the practice of naturopathic medicine. So I am a naturopathic doctor. I use the credentials ND after my name. I do carry malpractice insurance. I bill insurance and collect reimbursements for that. And that's all possible because I am a licensed physician in the state of Connecticut. Now, you are in the state of New York, right? Well, New York does not have a rule on the books that regulates the practice of naturopathic medicine. So what that means is that degree, that credential, the same one that I worked so hard to get and paid so much money for over 25 years ago, right? That earned me this credential. I cannot use it, or I cannot rely on it in the state of New York. The letters, the designation ND, naturopathic doctor, that I use after my name in Connecticut mean nothing to the state of New York. So quite honestly, I'm not suggesting that you do this, but you could put ND after your name and it wouldn't be illegal. If you tried to do that over here, it would be illegal because only a duly trained naturopathic doctor can use those credentials in this state, but not in your state. And like I say, there's some nuance from there, depending on which state you're in and whether or not they regulate it. There's different rules about what you are and are not allowed to do. So for example, in Washington and Oregon, naturopathic doctors prescribe medicine, do minor surgery, are well regulated, all that kind of stuff. Whereas, like I say, in New York and many other states in the American South, no regulation whatsoever. Having the name, the designation ND after your name means absolutely nothing. And so, yeah, we're in a really weird limbo spot in terms of regulation of the practice.
You're a step ahead of us.
Yeah, step ahead of us. Yeah,
I know we have legislation out there for some states, but nothing's passed, nothing's gone through.
Sure.
We're trying
and I
to
can tell you
license
what to prepare yourself for, right? What happens is that if there's a lot of good reasons, and you mentioned some of the compelling ones to regulate a practice, right? Because then your accountability and all that stuff, it's a good thing, but it's not a good thing for the people who want to keep it the way it is, right? Those unregulated people. So when you're trying to push forward legislation that says, hey, naturopathic doctors should be regulated, it'd be a good thing, we'd have malpractice, blah 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 blah. Guess who comes out against us? It's the people who call themselves naturopathic doctors, who don't have the training, who don't want to be regulated, because all of a sudden they're going to lose their shirts, right? So be prepared. That's what's coming.
Well, we already had it. We tried during COVID to do the licensure for New York State, and I'm not going to mention names, but the big boxers all actually came together and came out against us. Our smaller studios tried doing it because we want to have credibility. But if you think about it, if you're a big box gym and you're paying your trainer minimum wage, maybe $1 above minimum wage, and all of a sudden they get licensed, and now you need insurance over that license, there goes your moneymaker. Bye-bye. Because all of them are going to piece out, and they're going to get sued because they're horrible trainers. Not all of them, but most of my horror stories have been from my big boxers, because those trainers there's no management on top of them. There's no one watching them. There's no one training them. It's just harder because it's a bigger gym, whereas the smaller studios, everything's a lot more controlled in a controlled environment of what we're doing. So definitely
keep fighting the good fight, man.
Different.
Keep fighting the good fight. It's a hard one. Yeah, I totally understand it. We have a very, very similar process here. So yeah, it's absolutely true. Yep.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to just give a quick shout out to our sponsor. So thank you so much to Centripeak, guys. They have been a sponsor of the show for quite some time now. We really appreciate it. So if you're feeling tired, sluggish, unmotivated, you want some good supplements related to naturopathic medicine here, this is just for you, especially for men who have lower testosterone. Please do not, for the love of God, go start taking testosterone unless prescribed by a doctor, because that's just going to lead to a bunch of downhill negative side effects, and you're going to be stuck out of the rest of your life. So instead, try doing it the natural route. Go work out and try Centripeak, which has a bunch of different vitamins that have all been proven, that we've talked about on the show time and time again, to help naturally increase your testosterone, get you at least started, help with vitality, help you feel better. My personal favorite is the word I can never pronounce, which is ashwagandha, which does help with cortisol levels. It is something I personally take for myself because I do too much in my life. So it helps relax me. We've done episodes on it over and over again. So definitely thank you so much to Centripeak. And it is regulated, guys, by the UL, and it is made in the USA. So please try for 20% off. Redefine 20. That is right, for 20% off. Put in the code Redefine 20. Thank you so much, Centripeak. We really appreciate it and hope to have a continued sponsorship with you guys. Anyway, so let's hop back into what we were talking about a little before with what's the next step, right? So we talked about regulations. We talked about how licensure, you said, is confusing. I didn't know Connecticut had a licensure for naturopathic doctors. I knew New York didn't, because that's what I see. And then with it, I mentioned this pre-show, and I'm just going to throw this example totally out. I did, just for my audience, I did preface that I'm going to tell them this question because it's a hard one. I had ND, who I no longer work with, but I didn't really refer people. But the reason I was always skeptical is because she kept telling me she gives people hookworms. And for those that don't know what they are, they go through your foot and they sit in your GI tract and basically make it impossible for you to process foods, and can help you lose weight technically because you just gave yourself a parasite. So not something I'm ever a fan of, but she was saying it cured cancer. It does this. And I was just like, oh my God, that's just not true. Please don't inject people into hookworms. And then she told me people pay like tens of thousands of dollars per hookworm. So little things like that just kind of rub you the wrong way. So just kind of talk to me a little bit about that, because I didn't get your opinion about it yet, but I wanted to hear it now. So go for it.
Yeah, totally. Right. That it sounds dicey, doesn't it? Right. The idea of purposely infecting somebody with something that has such a bad reputation. So it's not something that I do. It's not something that I'm an advocate for, but I am familiar with the premise, and I'm well acquainted with the therapy. So these hookworms, first of all, they're non-infectious. They're not pathogenic. They don't cause the kind of parasitic infections that you see in in poverty-stricken areas, right? So they're attenuated versions of these parasites. They're not capable of causing infection. So that's part number one. And then part number two is really, I think it goes to the idea or the premise on which this therapy is based, right? And I think let's talk about this for a minute, because it's fascinating. We have a whole bunch of problems in the developed world, in the Western world, that are fairly new, or at least newly exploding. The prevalence going up. Things like allergies, things like autoimmune disease, food allergies, environmental allergies. Even when you and I were young, the prevalence of severe anaphylactic type allergies to foods was much, much lower than it is now. So there's got to be that it sort of explains that. There's obviously some immunologic dysregulation that's driving these sorts of things, but it's not really totally well understood. Now, let's take and go to these poverty-stricken areas, for example, in certain places in Africa, and see that there's a fascinating kind of story here that comes out of the Doctors Without Borders a nonprofit organization that does a lot of work in these poverty-stricken areas, and they make a product that's called Plumpy Nut. Did you ever hear of it before? Plumpy
No.
Nut. It's basically peanut butter and dry milk powder with a multivitamin added to it, and it's shelf stable. It's a nutritional source for these children who are otherwise starving. And Doctors Without Borders and the agencies that put this stuff together give millions and millions of gallons of this Plumpy Nut stuff out to poor people. And here in America, peanut allergies are extremely common. I'm sure you know people who have it. No peanuts on the menu, this sort of thing. No peanuts in the classroom for this kid's school, right? In certain areas in sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of the children and families eat nothing but Plumpy Nut. They only eat this stuff. That's all they have, right? They're given it by the nonprofits. There's virtually no cases of peanut allergy in any of these kids. Doesn't happen. Why does it not happen there, but it happens here? And the idea, the theory behind this, is something called the hygiene hypothesis, which is that the immunologic exposure that those kids get to the bacteria, the viruses, and yes, the tapeworms, the hookworms, the parasites that are part of their daily routine, make their immune systems kind of like otherwise distracted, you might say, or like exercise for the immune system in a certain way that makes them less likely to react to something like peanuts or to something like an autoimmune disease, part of their own tissue. So the hygiene hypothesis is what drives this theory of the application, the therapeutic application of microorganisms, whether it could be parasites, it could be other organisms too, to try to modulate the immune system. And that's the idea. There's quite a bit of research about it, mostly coming out of Europe, about the application of these parasitic organisms to engage the immune system, cause it to react against the parasite, and then create this. It's quite literally like exercise, right? Is the idea, or fitness for the immune system, because our modern day immune systems don't get very much exercise because we live in such a clean, sterile kind of environment. So that's the premise, right? I'm not saying go out and do it, but that is the premise. I hope that helps.
All right, I'm gonna talk about something you mentioned, and then I'm gonna get a bunch of angry emails from a bunch of different parents.
Oh, that's good. That's good content.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna say it. It's something my wife and I talk about all the time. Our kids, when we have them, which will be relatively soon, are going to be the dirtiest kids on the block. And you nailed it on the head with the hygiene hypothesis. It's not a hypothesis; it's true. We are way too clean, and parents obsess about cleaning their kids way too much. You got to think about how we lived for thousands and thousands of years outside in the mud, surrounded by everything. I'm not saying do hookworms, but tapeworms, any of that by any means. All I'm saying is go let your kid play outside. Make sure they get dirty. Have them roll around in the mud and then come do it again and jump on another kid and have them roll around. Like whatever. Like that's what kids are supposed to do. Your immune system when you're young needs to develop. And it's going to start attacking itself if it has nothing to go after in essence. And that's where all these allergies have come from. We did an episode on allergies. And I didn't get too much into detail of this, but that's one of the main reasons that we have all these issues in our society. COVID was the worst freaking thing to happen to us because people came too clean. You are too clean. You're going to damage your kids' immune systems. They need to be dirty. They need to be exposed. Kids need to be around bacteria and viruses. They need to get sick. Why? Because by the time they get older and their immune system starts going, they're going to get sick and it's going to be way worse. They're going to get diseases they were supposed to have as a kid, those viruses that you can build up to and no longer get when you're older, and it's going to kill them. That's not what you want. You don't want to be 70 and have to worry about dying and hiding in a bubble like Bubble Boy because you don't have an immune system from when you were younger, when you're supposed to get sick and you're able to fight off these viruses. Like that's a real thing. We need to get dirty. We need to be exposed. We need to go out there. Another really cool thing, which I thought was very interesting, they just did a study a couple years ago on allergies as effect to mothers who are pregnant being exposed to cigarette smoke. And it's been shown that those mothers who are around cigarette smoke, their kids are 10 times more likely to get allergies than those that were not. So that is another thing back we spoke about back in the 60s, 70s, even 80s. Smoke was everywhere. It was in everything. Everywhere you went was covered in smoke. That's why we had one of the reasons we had a huge boom of allergies. And then we decided, let's not expose our kids to anything. So they're going to be more likely to develop allergies in the womb. Then they're going to come out. They're not going to be exposed to these things they're going to be allergic to at a young age. And they're now going to have peanut allergies where they breathe the peanut and they get really sick. Like you don't want that.
Indeed. The world is not a sterile. The world's not a sterile place. It's not designed that way. And that kind of exposure, even like kids who grow up in rural environments on farms or with animals in the house, they also tend to develop less of these kinds of allergies. Again, the immune system, just like basically every other system, needs fitness, needs exercise, and immunological fitness means requires exposure, right? It's just in the same way that physical fitness also requires exposure, so exposure to movement, exposure to lifting heavy things, that kind of stuff. That's how you build fitness. And the same thing is true immunologically. So yeah, we're on the same page there. I have 3 kids. And
my grandfather's the example, who's 91 years old. Guy had polio when he was 15 and he had COVID like a couple weeks ago, and he literally was like, just, oh, I'm good. Because when he was a doctor, there was no sterile anything. Nothing was sterile. I mean, that's before they checked blood and did blood transfers. That's what we're talking about, going back like 60 years. There was no anything. He did surgeries like not gowned up at all, going in there and being exposed to God knows what virus. Because in his mind, kind of like my grandma's mind, it was, I want to help these people no matter what happens to me. I care about them more. And they didn't get sick at their older ages. And then when they did, it was gone like this. Sarah said my wife, Sarah said something about her grandma. The woman could have been around any disease and just never got sick because she was a nurse. And all the way back when was the same thing, exposed to everything. It didn't matter. Huge
having a rich supply of antibodies, right? That's what immunological fitness means: a rich supply of antibodies and knowing how to, an immune system that can deploy them when needed. And it makes sense. Yeah, it really does.
So that's just my rant about sterilization. All the angry emails you could send to me later, but do your research first and then please get back to me. Anyway. We did want to talk a little bit about just the last topic about musculoskeletal pain. I know that's something we mentioned before and something obviously everyone knows I have a lot of knowledge in. considering from my own experience. But just wanted to hear your opinion about what to do. Let's say, as an example, someone has upper trapezius pain, it's locked out. The most common course of treatment when you go to an MD is going to be a cortisone steroid shot. Common practice if you go to a DO is going to be dry needling or trigger point injections, whatever you want to call it, it's the same thing. So what do you think is the best form of action, and how would you deal with tight upper trapezius?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it probably follows a pattern that could be probably applied to any body area, but sticking with the tight upper traps, sure, there may be some structural or biomechanical problem that needs to be addressed. I know that's your domain, finding the strength, finding the flexibility, finding whatever the biomechanical or structural imbalances are. In the case of upper trapezius, it's often related to posture, especially the forward head posture, and all the things that can cause structural or biomechanical issues. So certainly taking a look at that. And again, I won't spend a lot of time there. That's your area. I know that you know that area extremely well. Structural issues. And then of course there's especially if it's a chronic problem, we need to look at some of the underlying biochemistry here, and all of the factors that lead to pain in one person that might be that are underlying causes. And the way that I look at that is that, yes, when there is a painful area, there's almost always some kind of structural thing. We mentioned that. And then there is usually some amount of excessive inflammation, not just inflammation, but more inflammation than there ought to be in that given area, right? It might be a very focal or specific area. And excessive inflammation, that is inflammation that exceeds the amount that should be there based on the amount of trauma or damage to the area, that excessive inflammation needs to be calmed down and controlled. And so that's number one. And that could be done with dietary interventions, with lifestyle interventions, with nutritional supplementation. And then of course, there's a whole host of drugs that can do that, which are, I think, more of a last resort. So inflammation is and then the next one would be muscular tension, and that might be focal muscular tension, as in a trigger point that a DO or an acupuncturist might use a needle to try to release. Focal muscle tension is very localized, but it also could be a broader muscular tension, like an overall generalized muscle tension that shortens a particular muscle in or adjacent to the area. So muscle tension is a big one and a major driver of pain for a lot of people. If there's structural damage and some inflammation, and then an added muscle tension, putting additional pressure on the area, compressing vasculature, compressing nerves, just adds insult to injury, so to speak. So muscle tension needs to be controlled. And there's a lot of ways to do that. Under identifying the underlying cause, maybe it's strength. Muscle needs to be stronger. There's other factors too. And then the third one, which is not talked about too often, is fibrosis. And fibrosis is scar tissue formation, which can be in the muscles and the soft tissues, and in the fascia, which encapsulates or sort of compartmentalizes muscles. And fibrosis is like, I always think of like a piece of meat. If it's like chewy and grist, that's a more fibrotic piece versus something that's tender and more supple. And there's a bunch of interventions, including a nutritional supplement called bromelain, which comes from pineapple, which is directly anti-fibrotic. Bromelain is also, by the way, the active ingredient in meat tenderizer. I don't know if you know that. You sprinkle it on a piece of meat, it will break up the fibrin in the meat and make a chewy or tough steak more tender. And bromelain is also absorbed intact through the GI tract and can exert its anti-fibrotic action on fibrotic tissue in the body. So anyway, yeah, those are the things: structural issues, inflammatory or excessive inflammation, soft tissue tension, and fibrosis. Those are big ones that I would be targeting for a person with upper trapezius or any other kind of pain.
Yeah, I didn't know the bromelain thing, so that's pretty cool to hear. I'm gonna have to look into that one a little more. I actually thought what you were going to say was for anti-inflammatory purposes, the turmeric option, because that's been blowing up everywhere. So
It has, yeah. So I would have. I mean, yeah, certainly. Like like I mentioned at the top, I'm the medical director and a founder of this company called Up Wellness, and our top selling product is called Golden Revive Plus. I don't want to be a pitch man here, but the reason why that product sells so well is because it works, and it's used for musculoskeletal pain. And the ingredients in it, I'll just give you the very short list, include bromelain, which I just mentioned. That's why I put it in there. It also includes turmeric, which you were one step ahead of me there. But not just any turmeric, like a concentrated curcumin extract. Turmeric contains curcumin. That's the active ingredient.
yeah,
And it only contains about 2%. So if you concentrate the turmeric, you can get it up to 95% or so. And that's what I put in Golden Revive Plus. So a concentrated curcumin. It also contains boswellia, which is commonly known as frankincense. That's a biblical ancient herb. And that resin has anti-inflammatory capabilities. And it also has there's some research that shows that it improves the integrity of cartilage surfacing. So that's cool too. I mentioned bromelain already. Magnesium I put in there because magnesium has muscle relaxation effects.
We love magnesium because for those that
Yeah,
listen to my quick tip on magnesium, whew, doesn't make you poop, but keep going.
It does. Yes, it can, which is a good thing for some people. And if it's a problem in supplemental form, there's other forms of magnesium people can use to prevent that. And then I have quercetin. Quercetin is a bioflavonoid molecule that's extracted from food. It comes from onions primarily. There's also some of it in apples. And quercetin also has direct action against many of the elements in the biochemical cascade that leads to inflammation. NF-kappa B, cyclooxygenase 2, many of the same targets actually as pharmaceuticals. And then the last ingredient is one that doesn't actually treat or address musculoskeletal pain directly, but it's piperine. And piperine is a black pepper extract that enhances the absorb of everything else, right? So there's studies that show, like, if you take curcumin, not very much of it gets absorbed, but if you take it with piperine, it's upwards of 2,000% increase in absorptive capacity. So anyway, that's the ingredient list of Golden Revive Plus, the best-selling musculoskeletal pain product that I made at Up Wellness. So yeah, you were right. You were right on target. That's the secret sauce right there.
Yeah, pretty much most things are familiar with, and kind of, I mean, that's what they do. But for vitality purposes, it's all about just taking different supplements and putting them together. I don't know if you've ever heard of examine.com. Do you know the website?
It doesn't sound familiar.
So that's what I personally use. It takes all of the articles on PubMed and puts them into a really nice chart about whether or not the study showed this supplement was effective for this condition.
Oh, that's good.
Instead of spending 20 hours on PubMed and getting confused and overwhelmed and reading all the studies, you can literally type in curcumin and then it will say, okay, inflammation. It showed that it had this kind of response based on this many studies with this many participants and this kind of grade, and we would recommend or not recommend it for it. So I really like that because it's an unbiased source as opposed to just finding a blog on anyone's website, because who knows if they're factual or not.
Absolutely.
So definitely love that. I get nothing for saying that. I'm just going to be very clear. I'm not a sponsor of Examine. I'm not anything. I'm not affiliated with them whatsoever. I just went to a workshop the CEO was running at a fitness convention, and the guy blew my mind how smart he was. And I was just impressed. I was like, wow, this guy knows what he's talking about. So I found his website and I use it all the time. So, but definitely something just for general population worth checking out. But yeah, I think the musculoskeletal purpose, you pretty much nailed it on the head. I liked how you mentioned the scar tissue phenomenon, and I just had a little trigger in my brain that came up when you say that, because the most common thing I get is people always complain about pain after an injury from scar tissue, because you get a bunch of scar tissue built up in an area and the muscle and joint becomes very stiff. And unfortunately, I have to tell them, well, we got to move it. Like, you know, when you go to PT and they're pushing it kind of past those boundaries and it hurts, you need to do that. You need to recreate that fluid in the area, break up that scar tissue, and it just triggers. Like, that's something you need to move. The last thing you want to do is let that scar tissue get tighter, tighter, and tighter, and tighter, because then it's going to hurt way more when you do have to go about it.
Yeah, so it's a very common trigger for pain, especially pain after an injury and pain that goes with stiffness. So yeah, I would encourage you to look at bromelain. You can use Examine, check out bromelain and its usefulness as an antifibrotic agent. And I think about it, I use the meat tenderizing example. Bromelain is useful from a chemical perspective. Literally, it's a proteolytic enzyme. It breaks up fibrin. But if you eat meat and you ever have occasion to have a not so tender piece, there's two things that you do to manage that, right? You can use this metaphor with your clients too. One of them is to sprinkle meat tenderizer on, and that will have a chemical effect. But the other is a mechanical effect, and that's that hammer thing. It's a meat tenderizing hammer, right? You pound it, right? And you pound it, that's mechanical. And the metaphor would be that, yeah, if you have an old injury and fibrotic or adhesions that are accumulating scar tissue in the area, you need to do physical work on it, kind of like analogous to that meat tenderizing hammer, either pounding it with your fingers or with a dry needle, maybe, or with massage gun of some sort, or like you just described, movement, pushing that end range of motion to break up that tissue. And then the kill effect from the bromelain can be extremely, extremely useful. So anyway, pro tip.
I absolutely love it. And I'm just going to wrap this episode up. So I'm going to ask you the final two questions I ask everybody. The first one, if you were to summarize this episode in 1 or 2 sentences, what would be your take-home message?
The take-home message, well, I would summarize the episode by just saying great energy, good energy, and a sort of wide-ranging conversation. I think that our interface, I think that we can really agree, which is on most things. Movement is medicine. There's just no substitute. Our bodies are built to move. Get out there moving.
I'm just going to say fitness just because it's our slogan, but
sure.
I love it.
Yeah, even better.
Definitely love it. And then the second question, the easiest one of all, how can people find you, get a hold of you, give us all the good stuff?
Oh yeah, thank you for that. So yeah, my company is called Up Wellness. That's UPWELLNESS. Upwellness.com is the homepage of the website where you can see me and all the products that I formulated. And then I also do quite a lot on social media these days, just educating people in all sorts of areas, musculoskeletal pain and otherwise, on Instagram, and that's at Dr. Josh Levitt. DRJOSH, and then my last name, Levitt, Levitt. And then I've been doing a lot on TikTok lately. The handle there is at Up Wellness, and that's a fun platform that's difficult to predict, but we've had a few pretty good hits over there too, and it's fun to engage with people. So yeah, upwellness.com, or find me on Instagram or TikTok.
I appreciate it. And thank you for coming on again. Thank you guys for joining us on this week's episode of Health and Fitness Redefined. Don't forget, please hit that subscribe button, guys. Follow the show. It does help us and means the world to me. And thank you so much. And remember, fitness is medicine. Until next time.